Okay, welcome back to the show. And I have a returning guest, one of my favorite guests that I've had in over 250 episodes now at this point. It's Mr. Chris Hansen. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm good. Thanks for having me again. How's everything?
Absolutely good. And you?
Excellent. Excellent. Very excited about the new network and True Blue crime streaming and all the new predator investigations, the new documentaries. It's an exciting time.
Yeah, you've kind of got a lot going on since we last talked. I know you were kind of focusing on your own podcast the last time we talked. It's well over a year ago now anyway. I'm not quite sure how long it's been. So like if you want to break down the network and what's going on, we'd love to hear about it.
Sure. Well, True Blue is a new crime streaming network that premiered a week ago from this very conversation. And within that, we have a number of new crime documentaries that I'm working on, some very compelling material. And we have other documentaries that we've obtained from other sources. We have our new Predator investigation, Takedown with Chris Hansen, and we have a new crime news magazine called True Crime Nation, which we will use to cover breaking news like and fast moving crime stories like the Club Q shooting in Colorado, the tragic slayings in Moscow, Idaho, the poor woman in North Carolina who was killed in Mexico. All these intriguing mystery crime stories we'll be breaking down and having exclusive access in a lot of different ways on True Crime Nation. So it's very exciting. You know, one of the lessons I learned from the last two documentaries I did at Discovery Plus, the Peter Nygaard investigation and the Onision in real life, I love Discovery and Discovery Plus. It's a great network, great people, but it took, in one case, 12 months, in another case, 18 months to put these documentaries together. There are levels of bureaucracy and meetings and A meetings and B meetings and green light meetings, and we don't have those at True Blue. I partnered with Sean Reck of Transition Studio, who I met when he produced the White Boy Rick documentary, the teen drug dealer who grew up and was busted himself and was serving a long prison sentence, a very controversial case out of Detroit, which I broke many years ago as a young reporter in Detroit. And through that conversation and through that interview, we developed a relationship. And he already had a streaming service, a streaming network in another sector called American Gospel TV. And so he knew how to put this together, and we decided to work together and put together a crime network. And it's off to a great start. So I'm very excited about it. And essentially what we're doing here is we're taking the same enterprising techniques we use to report on crime, to take people inside the commission of a felony in these predator investigations, and we take those techniques and we point them towards the distribution of the content and getting it more efficiently
Hmm.
and more effectively to the consumer of that content, to the viewer. And I
Yeah.
think it's for a guy like me, that's the future of this industry.
Yeah, and I think when you say it's the future, like even over here over the last couple of weeks, there was a massive story about a footballer, Manchester United, Cristiano Ronaldo, and
Sure.
Pierce Morgan, as you probably know, Pierce has his own YouTube channel now and his own kind of news channel, if you will. And it's a way of getting the stories out there fast, as you say, because you don't have much turnaround time now these days, do you? With people, if a story happens today, people want to hear about it today,
Yeah, and
basically.
I can, I'm nimble enough in this new environment where I can go to the places, or I can sit where I'm sitting right now in our True Blue studio, and I can talk to the survivor who was shot 9 times in Club Q from his hospital bed, who will talk to me because he feels comfortable talking to me because of all the years of doing this crime reporting, and I get the same access through law enforcement, and we have a number of areas where we've done predator investigations and are planning predator investigations. So this will be a continuing stream of content that people will find nowhere else.
Will you find yourself streaming on YouTube as well, or are you just going to keep it directly on the network itself?
I think that we'll have a YouTube component to it, but starting off, it's going to be exclusively on True Blue. We'll do teases and we'll interconnect various social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even, and YouTube, probably TikTok as well, to bring a larger fan base into True Blue streaming network. And people who want more information about it can go to watchtrueblue.com, and it lays it all out there. But it's on Roku. There's an app. It's very easy to get. And in Europe,
Yeah.
um, some of our films are not yet licensed for Europe, but you'll be able to get all of our content. You'll be able to get all the Predator investigations, and we have 7 or 8 of them out now in the first batch. We're rolling out more tonight as we speak.
Wow.
And the first episode of True Crime Nation will come out in the next few days. And we'll stream these interviews that we have, as well as have the edited pieces in documentary form. We will have clips of these interviews as we get them. So I do an interview on Wednesday night. It's available on Trublu, and I'll be talking about these things on my various social media platforms as well.
Yeah. And
So
True
people
Crime
know.
Nation then. Yeah. True Crime Nation then. What exactly is that?
So that's a news magazine, crime news magazine show, which we will explore all kinds of topics, and we will, breaking news, crime trends, crime stories, murder cases. We'll cover it all, but it'll be in a more traditional news magazine format, and I'll be hosting and reporting for that. And we've got some other correspondents who'll be coming on board to help us with that as well.
Yeah. A friend of the show's met you at one of the conventions. Kelly, she done an interview
Oh
with
yeah,
you.
yeah.
And
CrimeCon.
and she does the true crime podcast, and true crime is just huge in America at the moment, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think it's always been popular. I think people have figured out that there are creative and ways to do it, and ways to help, solve crime, and to create a sense of awareness and justice through reporting and journalism and podcasts and those types of things. What I think we bring to this genre that nobody else really does like we do it is we take people inside the commission of a crime, whether it's the Predator cases or anything else, and we take viewers on a journey of discovery where they see things they wouldn't normally see, and they hear things they wouldn't normally hear. And we get into the minds of criminals, and we hear the voice of victims. And I think when you do that, you can create an environment, you can create awareness and a dialogue that perhaps protects somebody else from becoming a victim. And they're interesting stories. Look, these
Yeah.
stories are as old as the Bible. It's good versus evil. There's intrinsic fascination with them. And we do all the work and get all the access so regular people who watch us don't have to do it. And
Yeah.
hopefully don't become a victim of it to find out.
Yeah. Technology has moved on a long way, sorry. And what's the main difference you find in recording, say, Takedown with Chris Hansen compared to Catch a Predator back in the day? How is it advanced on your side of things?
Well, in a couple of different ways. From an editorial standpoint, think about this. When we did the initial To Catch a Predator series, we merely had decoys from Perverted Justice, the online watchdog group, in chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo, right? That was 18 years ago.
Yeah.
The activity was more concentrated, so it was easier to detect and catch these guys. Now, as you know, there's been an explosion of social media platforms and places where adults can approach children. So there's more of this activity, but at the same time, it's more diffuse, it's more spread out. And so it's harder, it's more of a challenge. I shouldn't say harder, because I never thought we'd still be doing it successfully 18 years later. But we now have guys who, in the chats, will say to the decoys, is this a Chris Hansen deal? Is this Sheriff so-and-so's deal? And the decoy says, I don't know, who's that? I don't know, and they show up anyway. And instead of running when they see and recognize me, they understand that this is the part of the show where they have to talk to me. So whether they're sitting across from me or in handcuffs on the floor, as you'll see in some of the new takedown investigations, they typically talk. We had cases in Polk County, Florida, where we did a bunch of stings. We caught 13 guys surfaced in a sting in the course of a week. Guys who were fanboys at the opportunity to sit down and do an interview with me, who had seen the shows, who could identify specific podcasts, not just my podcast, Predators I've Caught, where we go over cases we've already covered and find out where the guys are today and those type of things. But they recognize me from being on, a podcast like this one or another one. And it's shocking to me that people still think they can get away with this, but they do. And it's, look, the internet has exploded from a technological standpoint of covering these stories. and infiltrating these crimes, exposing them. Our technology has become easier to use, lighter footprint, smaller
Yeah.
footprint. And so we can take a smaller team with less effort into an area and cover it just as well as we did before.
Mm. How do you determine an area that you're going to film in?
We try to cover the country. So we've had investigations in Florida, in the Midwest. We've got some planned, in other areas of the country. So we try to spread it out. But I think what we've learned is that there are specific law enforcement agencies around the country which are very, very focused on this sort of activity, and we will continue to work with them and rotate throughout the country in these, 6, 7, 8 different agencies, and we take on more all the time. Some of them, quite honestly, have reached out to us to partner with some of the agencies we worked with before to share their experience with the new agencies to understand how to do it. They know they have a problem in their area, but they don't have the proper staff or training yet to do it. So we see this continuing to expand for many years to come.
Yeah. I talked to you last time about people in the UK and Ireland taking the law into their own hands, doing their own
Mhm.
stings on Facebook Live and things like that, and people can have their opinions on that. But would you ever think about doing a show outside of America, either in Europe or UK or someone like that, to show people kind of how it's done, I guess, in the right way?
Yeah, I would love to do it outside of the United States. And it's something that we're looking at now. I am convinced that the most socially responsible way to do this is to collaborate with law enforcement. The first two
Yeah.
investigations we did way back when, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if guys were going to show up. We thought there was a good chance of it. And so we partnered with Perverted Justice. We had security there, but we didn't collaborate with law enforcement. And so in many cases, these guys would walk away free. Some were prosecuted after the fact, especially after our second investigation outside Washington, D.C., but many were unprosecuted, and it was frustrating. And we made a decision back then that we would work with law enforcement because these guys needed to face justice. Number one. Number two, as a producer of television, it was unfulfilling for the viewer to see these guys walk away without paying a price for trying to rape a child. And so I don't see doing this without law enforcement going forward. We've done it. We are very adaptive depending on which agency we're working with. They all have a little bit of a different methodology, and we respect that. And so sometimes the suspect is taken down or restrained before I get a chance to interview. Sometimes I get to interview first. It's different in every jurisdiction. But I tell you what, you have to evolve in this business. And what I found is in the cases with the jurisdictions where, for a lot of different reasons, they want to subdue the suspect first, those interviews, and they can say no. The predator can say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to talk to Chris Hansen. And that's the end of it. But
Mhm.
almost routinely, they decide they want to talk. They're either going to spin their defense, I was only going to help the child out, or they're going to cop out to what they did and why. And in all of the cases, for instance, in Florida, where I showed up to meet a child, each and every one of those guys talked to me. We had a guy who was a fan who was trying to meet a 12-year-old girl for sex and talked deeply, almost in a Silence of the Lambs type of interview, giggly giddy almost about, telling his story to me, why he did it and how he was going to carry out this act. We had a guy who was the son of a retired deputy police chief. We had a guy whose job it was to train school districts in computer software that is supposed to educate kids to protect them from being victimized by predators. And here he is
Jesus.
trying to meet a child online in Florida. Some of these people worked at the theme parks. They continue to come from all walks of life. So again, the problem's not going away, and we're not going away. And we will continue to create this awareness and to push this dialogue so parents can have a discussion with their children and point to something and say, look, this is what can happen. And
Yeah.
I think we have to create deterrence. And that's what we try to do. Obviously, law enforcement would be doing this with or without us in many cases. But I think to show it is not only important, but look, at the end of the day, it's very compelling television as well. It
Yeah.
just is,
Yeah.
you know.
And you talked about jurisdictions before, and I know, like, from being in the States, everywhere is kind of has different laws. Do you ever get reservations from law enforcement to be involved in a project like this?
Yes, it has to be an agency that is proactive in this area, you know, and it very likely is not an agency that is so big where the bureaucracy would be almost impossible to penetrate. I mean, I have a lot of good contacts, for instance, at the NYPD, and I have very warm relationship with many people at the NYPD. But to try to do a predator sting with the NYPD would be mind-numbingly difficult when we can go across the river or, you know, out on Long Island where we've done it, and just have a smaller agency with which to work. So, you know, there's a lot that goes into this, and you have to find the agency that's dedicated, and you have to find one that's, you know, willing to work with you. And it's
Yeah.
look, there's a certain inherent risk in it too, and I think that's what makes it so compelling to watch. Is that, you know, something could go wrong at any time. You protect yourself, you do the best you can, but you take that minimal risk. I think it's a minimal risk, and I've done it 18 years with nary a scratch, and you're smart about it. And there are certain guys who they won't let into the house or to the structure wherever you're doing it because there's the potential of carrying weapons or any other number of things that could make for a volatile situation. And you know, we take a lot of precautions when we do this. We take it very seriously.
Of course, like if someone showed up high on drugs as well or something like that, anything
Yeah.
can happen. Was there ever a moment, either recently or before, that you felt actually kind of scared?
After the fact, we had a guy in Flagler Beach who was a police officer in a small town at the border of Alabama and Florida. And he had been chatting with the decoys for the better part of a week, and it was very graphic and really obscene what he wanted to do with a child. And he never showed up. And some of these guys never show up. They get off just by having the obscene chat. And so we break down one night, and suddenly we find out that this guy is in the area and he's driven by the Sting House, but nobody's there because we turned everything off. And so the police stop him. They do a traffic stop. And it turns out he's got a loaded 38 in his pocket. In
Fuck.
his car, he's got a loaded handgun, another handgun, an assault rifle, and a shotgun with 800 rounds of ammunition. So it gives you pause to think if this rolled sideways, it could have been a problem. Thankfully, it wasn't. You know, maybe he's one of those guys that just carries a gun everywhere. But I'm glad he was taken off before he got in the house. Sure.
Yeah. I watched the clip kind of on YouTube that was kind of, I guess, like a trailer and shows various different people. And I seen like one guy pulling up, like, is it in a golf buggy?
Yeah, golf cart.
What
Unbelievable.
is
A
up with that?
predator first. So he shows up to meet a teenage boy, and golf cart Matt, he nicknamed him. And again, here's a guy who knew exactly who I was, had seen a lot of my shows, and showed up anyway in a golf cart, which, you know, an indication of how close he lived to the Sting House. They haul him away. The next predator to show up in that particular sting is, first of all, he lies about his age, says he's, you know, 19. Turns out he's in his 60s. And they arrest him and take him away. And he says during his interview with detectives that it's a good thing they're doing that in this area because there are a lot of guys like him. In fact, there's a guy in a golf cart who's always trying to hit on kids. It's the guy we arrested the night before. And now they're sitting next to each other as different sorts of neighbors in the county jail.
Do you think that they potentially knew each other before this?
I don't think they knew each other. I think they knew of each other, but I don't think they were working in conjunction or anything like that. I just think that it was coincidence that they end up living in the same neighborhood, basically.
Yeah. And then I see like another guy wanted to, was it bring or set up a glory hole?
That was the second guy who came in who said a lot of guys have to be, you know, pursued here because they're doing the same thing I'm doing. In fact, there's a guy in a golf cart who does this all the time. Well, that was the guy, you know, Matt
That was
from
the
the night
guy.
before. Yeah, that was Glory
Yeah.
Hole, Jerry. Yeah.
Yeah, because I seen a comment on YouTube. It was said, "Glory hole, Chris Hansen, peak 2022. It's finally happened." Which I know,
Well,
like, it's obviously a serious thing that we're talking about, but at the same time, like people
well,
just
yeah, I think there's an
are
element
intrigued
of
by it.
yeah, there's an element of irony and humor. Certainly, I mean, it is a dark subject, clearly, and again,
Yeah,
the important thing is to get awareness out to parents about the safety of children online. But yeah, I mean, there's some pretty darkly humorous moments along the way. And I think that's part of also what makes this particular franchise so popular. I mean, it's been parodied on South Park and multiple different entertainment shows. It was just on Family Guy a couple weeks back. And so, again, none of that bothers me. It has become a bit of a iconic, you know, part of social media fabric, but all of it still points attention at a very worthwhile discussion. So I'm okay with all that.
yeah. Are you expecting to bump into some familiar faces from the past when you do this again?
You know, I always wonder that. And I'd
Mm,
like to think no, that once somebody's been caught, and that's why we do the podcast, Predators I've Caught, because so much of this, as you know, is done a little bit on the fly. I've got research, I've got questions, I've got the transcripts. But the podcast allows me to go back and immerse myself in all this after the fact in a very calm environment and watch the video and watch the interview I did and then figure out what this guy's been up to since and has he been in trouble again. I mean, we had one case where the guy a couple weeks ago on the Predators I've Caught podcast, a guy who had surfaced in a chat in Ohio during our investigation but didn't show up, moves down to Florida, gets caught in our Flagler Beach investigation in Florida. And while he's out on bail, gets caught physically having sex with a 14-year-old girl. I mean, how
Jesus.
can you can't make that up? But we wouldn't know all that without going back and doing the podcast and doing this research. So it is something I think people find fascinating because it's one, whatever happened to, and two, it's another way we can dig into the psyches of these guys and the backgrounds. And again, if you can get into their heads, you have a better chance of understanding how they operate, how they groom and protect kids. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Have you ever been in a situation where it was actually a woman in the chat talking to someone underage, or has that ever happened in all your time?
It's not happened in any of our investigations. I know it's happened, and I know it's been as women have showed up after a chat online, and it doesn't usually go down that way according to therapists who study this sort of thing.
Hmm.
When you see a female predator, the scenario is more likely to be the teacher student type situation. The female predator, the therapist will tell you, does not like the anonymity that a male predator loves. And so we have never seen it in 18 years of doing it. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. We just haven't seen
Yeah.
it happen.
And is it mostly kind of gay men looking to meet boys now, or is it older
No,
men looking to meet girls, a mix of everything?
it's predominantly heterosexual men looking for girls, and then a smaller percentage is guys looking for underage boys. But the
Yeah,
vast majority is heterosexual predator activity. Uh,
yeah,
Probably at least 60% based on our experience.
yeah, yeah. And then I noticed also in the teaser clip that one of the guys that you were talking to was on the ground in handcuffs. Was that because it was a volatile situation, or how do you
Yeah,
determine who
it
goes in the
became
cuffs?
volatile. So he came in, sat down, and answered some of the questions, and became agitated and started to go for the door. And he was, taken down by law enforcement. And as he was down on the ground, I sat in the chair and continued to ask questions, and he continued to answer them. So I figured, as long as I can get away with this and ask him questions, I'm going to ask.
Yeah,
Ultimately, I asked all the questions I could think of, and he was done. I was done, and they took him away.
yeah. One thing I always wondered, and maybe it's a kind of a boring question, but the legality of someone showing up to the house and you can show their face and put them out there on TV? What way does that work?
Well, we're covering the commission of a felony. I mean, this isn't a
Yeah.
game show where,
Yeah.
we need to get a waiver signed. I mean, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. You're committing a felony. We're covering that as a news organization. There's no prohibition for us. I mean, and on top of that, there have been criminal charges.
Yeah. Just on your podcast, Predators I've Caught, is that taking a back seat now with all this work you have going on, or what?
No. Predators I've Caught is still very much a priority for me. I just finished the latest episode day before yesterday, and I get excited with every episode. I know it sounds weird to talk about this sort of topic and say you get excited, but I do, and I find it fascinating, almost therapeutic, to go back and just live in these moments and think about that experience and take listeners behind the scenes. And people respond well to it. People seem to like it. And there's a big community out there. We're now in our third generation, basically, of very loyal followers of this franchise. And it's not going away anytime soon because the problem's not going away anytime soon. And look, law enforcement does its best. We do our best. But there's no demand reduction for this per se. So it's awareness, education, dialogue, and deterrence. And we try to provide all of that.
Do you find that any of these people can change or have changed during your research of this?
I think some have. I think we've come across people, and I'm in the process of getting some interviews with these people, hopefully for the podcast and for Trublu, who would tell us their success stories in getting past this. There are some who will never change, who've been in trouble repeatedly, but there are guys who realize what they're doing was horrible and illegal, and have changed. There are some who hate my guts, who want to blame me for their problems, and are angry. I mean, there are a lot of those guys out there, but I'm not the one who got online and tried to seduce a teenage boy or girl. They made that decision. They took those actions, and they showed up and paid the consequences.
Yeah. Chris, pleasure to talk to you again. Before we wrap
thank you
up,
for having me on again. Good luck
where...
with everything over there and all your endeavors. And I continue to be a loyal fan of yours, and I appreciate being on your show.
Yeah. Just before you go, just tell people where they can go just to follow all your social medias and the Trublu
So they
stuff.
can find me at official Chris Hansen on Instagram, TikTok, actually, Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, official Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, Twitter at Chris Hansen, all over Facebook, Cameo if you're looking for something for the holidays to give your loved one. And most important, watch Trublu.com. Has all the details about how to get the new crime streaming network, TRUBLU, and within that, all the different franchises we have going there. So I'm very excited. I think this is the future of what we do, and we're making the most of it.
Yeah. Chris, thanks a million for your time. I know you're
Thank
a really
you.
busy guy today.
Be well
Pleasure
and
to
have
catch
a
up
very
again.
happy holiday. All right. Take care.
You too.